person charges his zakat, that inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow all of these things to take place with his wealth. So, but when you talk about zakat itself, and this is what our discussions will be surrounding today, is to unpack this definition. When we unpack this definition, inshallah, we'll that's the crux of today's discussion. So, what is zakat? So, there's a few parts to it. Number one is the unconditional transfer. Sorry, previous slide. The unconditional transfer of ownership of a certain amount of wealth. Okay, so what is the amount of wealth? What is the type of wealth that Sharia has mandated zakat to be eligible upon? Number one, and it's an unconditional transfer, so it has a specific way of being transferred that's been prescribed by Sharia, right? Sharia has prescribed the amount, right? So a person can't give 1 year 3%, and then the other year he says, you know what, I gave 3% last year, so this year I'm going to give 1%. So Sharia has prescribed 2.5%, which is the minimum amount. The person can give more, but Sharia has prescribed a specific amount. And then, so that's the two things. So for three things: unconditional transfer, certain amount of wealth. Sorry, that's two things prescribed by Sharia, and to a deserving zakat eligible individual. So Sharia has defined who is zakat eligible, just because we may feel bad for somebody. We can't just give anybody zakat. We can't just give project zakat. Zakat is given to individuals, which Sharia has prescribed, and it can't change because the Quran has mentioned these categories, and it's an intent with an intention. So a person has to make an intention. A person can't just give a bunch of money and then intend later on that this is zakat. A person has to make intention whilst giving zakat. So inshallah, this is what we'll be unpacking in today's session. The next slide, please. So zakat is the third of the five pillars of Islam. So we mentioned zakat is mentioned 32 times in the Quran. 30 from the 32 times are legal and technical meaning of paying zakat, and salah and zakat are interlinked 28 times. And as we mentioned, that what is the connection? Is that salah is a purification of our bodies, of what is physical, and our souls. But when it comes to zakat, is the means of purifying our wealth. So, what is the objectives of zakat, right? So, there are many objectives of zakat, some which are the main ones, and some which are what you can say wisdoms. So, the first and foremost objective of zakat is to obey the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What that means is that if all the other four, so the second two, three, four, five, whether or not they were applicable, the first one is still the main objective, which is to obey the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, as the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to obey exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do. So that's the first and foremost thing, that as the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are obeying what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do. Number two is that Sharia has placed these mechanisms. Right? If you look at the concept of the Islamic economics, so Islamic finance functions within the paradigm of Islamic economics, which functions within the paradigm of the Islamic worldview. So if you look at the Islamic economical system, then part of the Islamic economical, so features of the Islamic economical system is the concept of redistribution of wealth. That wealth doesn't stay within the hands of certain individuals. So a person keeps in mind that no matter how much money he makes, or no matter how much gold he amasses, no matter how much wealth he has, part of that wealth is going to leave him. Right? Is going to leave him an obligation when it comes to his zakat. Right? So the more he earns, the more he has to give. He has to give a certain amount. So that kind of puts that perspective that that wealth doesn't belong to him. And the second mechanism which Sharia has obligated, which kind of removes the greed from wealth, is inheritance. So a person when a person dies, he doesn't get to choose where his wealth goes, except for a third of his wealth, which he can bequest. But other than that one third, he doesn't have the choice on where that wealth is going to go. So Sharia has placed these two mechanisms to explain to man that wealth doesn't really belong to you. It's supposed to be spent, it's supposed to be distributed according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated. So what happens when a person gives zakah? Greed it leaves his heart. So it purifies a person's soul from greed. Number three, it removes impurity from wealth. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that if a person doesn't give his zakah, right? If a person delays his zakah, then there is a certain impurity which comes over his wealth, and that impurity penetrates into all of his other wealth. So it's kind of like if a person has a pond, and to lead to that pond is a canal, and that canal, if that canal remains clean, then the water of the pond remains clean. But if that canal becomes dirty, then the whole wealth will become dirty. So Sharia has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the system that if a person doesn't give his zakah, then all of his other wealth will be in jeopardy. So if a person pays his zakat on time, then inshallah his wealth will be saved from being impure. And we'll discuss later on that part of the or some of the individuals who cannot receive zakat are the Banu Hashim, the people who are from the descendants of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We cannot give them zakat, right? Now we can give them zakat, and what is the reasonings for why we can't give them zakat? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that zakat is awsakhun nas. It is the impure wealth of the people, and the impure wealth of the people is not given to the Sayyid, the people of the descendants of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's removing impurity from the wealth which is present in our wealth. Number four, it helps the needy. Of course, the result of giving zakat, the direct result of our zakat, the impact of our zakat is that those individuals who are needy are receiving the zakat that we're giving them. And number five, which goes back to number two, is that it encourages the circulation of wealth. It ensures that wealth doesn't stay within the hands of certain individuals and doesn't get distributed. So, what are the preconditions of zakat? So, number one, so the first three you could say are the pillars of obligation. So for zakat to even be applicable upon you and any other rulings of Islam, essentially, these three have to be met. And the bottom two are more so things which cause the obligation to take into effect. So number one is Muslim. So uh, you know, of course, like in our countries in North America, it's we wouldn't it's kind of logical that a non-Muslim won't have to pay zakat, but you have to look at it in the sense that in an Islamic state which has a khalifa and a complete Islamic system, the Khalifa is charged from taking zakat from the people. So the zakat collectors will go around to collect zakat and do their inspections to ensure that Muslims are paying the zakat on time. So in that particular scenario, a zakat collector would not collect zakat from a non-Muslim. Number two, baligh. So this is a point of difference. So if, for example, a child has wealth, so on Eid, for example, your child gets a lot of Eid from his grandparents, from his uncles, from his cousins, and his wealth passes the zakatable wealth. So now he keeps that money in the hands of his parents as a trust. So now does that wealth need zakat to be paid upon? So this is a matter of difference according to the Hanafi madhab, which is, again, as I mentioned, the discussions will be based on the Hanafi madhab. Zakat on a non-baligh, so a child's wealth, is not obligatory until they become baligh. So they can amass all their wealth until they become baligh, and as soon as they become baligh, then they'll give they'll give zakat on that wealth. So this is an opinion of the Hanafi madhab. And the rationale behind it is because zakat is an ibadah, and the same way that salah is not obligatory on a non person who hasn't passed the age of puberty, the same way zakat is not obligatory upon them as well. But it's a matter of difference, as I mentioned. The sane person, so the person who is insane and has wealth, there's no zakat on him. Again, same reason, that it's an act of worship. So because it's an act of worship, it's only obligatory upon a person who is sane. And then number four and five, these are obligations related to that wealth. So number four is that a person has to own and possess nisab. What that means is that he needs to be the full 100% owner of zakatable wealth. That's number one. And he has to be able to, he has to have it accessible. He has to have access to that wealth. And nisab refers to the threshold of zakat, and inshallah we'll talk about it. But he has to own and he has to have access to that nisab. And number five, which is that he has to own the minimum amount of zakatable wealth for one entire year, right? So inshallah we'll talk about what ownership of 1 year means. There's a lot of misconceptions, or there's a lot of confusion on how to calculate ownership for a year, and we'll talk about that inshallah within the next slides. So what is the minimum threshold, right? So Sharia has prescribed through two thresholds of zakat, nisab. So one is the silver and one is the gold. So we find in hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned 20 dinars, which refers to gold, or 200 dirhams, which refers to silver. So which nisab should we consider? Classically, these nisabs were very close to one another, so there wasn't much difference between them. But now we have we have almost a tenfold, you could say, difference between the two. So the silver nisab is somewhere around 800, $900, and the gold nisab is around $9,000. So should we consider gold or should we consider silver? So if we consider gold, what that essentially means is that more people would be eligible to claim zakat because not many people would have that much in savings, and less people would be giving their zakat, right? So that's one consequence of taking the gold nisab. If we take the silver nisab, then less people would be, claiming zakat because the amount is quite, is not high, but it's not that it's not that high, but it's not that low. So not that many people would be claiming zakat, and more people would be discharging their zakat either locally or throughout the world. So which should we consider, right? So again, this is a matter of difference of ulama, even contemporary ulama, and within the Hanafi madhab as well. There's differences between which one to consider. But there is a concept within within the chapter of zakat, which is to give preference to the fuqara. So to choose opinions that would give more benefit to the poor, the people who don't have enough, right? So a person who's within, we're not talking about the person who has wealth between 1,000 and 5,000, right? So or 1,000 and 9,000. So that we're not talking about that person. We're talking about the person who has less than 1,000. So a person who, according to both opinions, would not be paying zakat. So give preference to those individuals, which means that give an opinion which would put more money into their hands, so that they could be supported because they're not going to pay zakat anyways. So because of that, I feel I opine with the opinion that a person should take the silver nisab. And again, right, it's not that much. If a person has $1,000, they're giving $25 in zakat. It's not much, right? $25 nowadays, you go out to you go out to eat, you're paying, $25 for a meal and a combo. So $25 of zakat is not that much if you have $1,000 worth of wealth. $2,000, $50. That's not that much. We can give that much, inshallah. Like that, inshallah, more people will be able to benefit from our zakat locally and internationally, inshallah. Okay. So what are the different scenarios? Number one is if a person could only have gold. If a person only has gold, then he'll go with the gold standard. He won't look at the silver because he doesn't have silver wealth. If a person only has silver, then he's not going to go look at the gold standard. He's only going to look at the silver. But if he has only cash or commodities, or he has mixed cash and gold, silver, this is where that difference of opinion comes along, whether a person takes the gold or a person takes the silver. So, as I mentioned, my opinion is that a person takes the silver standard so that, inshallah, there is more zakat being distributed, and more needy people are benefiting from our zakat. Next slide, inshallah. So how do we calculate our zakat, inshallah? So this is very important, is that zakat is an obligation, right? So we have, for example, uh, salah, right? So there's two types of obligation, you can say. There's an obligation which makes it obligatory for a person to pray, and then there's the obligation of, okay, now it's time for you, you have to pray now. So as soon as Dhuhr begins, right? So Dhuhr is going to begin, for example, at 1 p.m. Then it becomes obligatory for a Muslim to pray Dhuhr. But now, if a person's sinful, or is it person obligatory? Is it obligatory upon the person to pray zakat in that very moment? So a person, comes into his house. It's 1 o'clock. It's Dhuhr time, and he feels tired and he wants to take a nap. So is it permitted to take that nap, or does he have to pray Dhuhr in that very moment? Right. So according to, right, the understanding of Deen is that, our understanding of Sharia is that a person is not obligated to pray Dhuhr in that very moment. However, he has that time until Dhuhr time finishes to pray his Dhuhr. But however, when it comes to, the last few moments of Dhuhr, so let's say it takes a person 8 minutes to pray Dhuhr Salah, to pray the four fard of the Dhuhr. So the last 8 minutes before Dhuhr time is about to expire, it now becomes obligatory upon him to pray. He has to stand up and pray now, otherwise he's going to be sinful. So he can't eat, he can't sleep because he has to pray, otherwise his salah will be expired. So what they say is that there's a difference between the obligation, the general obligation, and there is the and so one is the general obligation and one is the obligation to discharge. So these are very important concepts, and this is applicable to zakat as well. So zakat is a fard, in an act of worship which has a specified time as well. So there is a specified time from which we calculate our zakat, and then we have a specific amount of time to give zakat. So the time where the obligation of zakat begins is a specific date. We may choose to calculate our zakat in Ramadan, or we may choose to discharge our zakat in Ramadan, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the obligation of zakat. The obligation of zakat is the date in which we became owners of nisab. This is the day that we became the owner of zakatable wealth. That is what is the most important. So you have to note that date down, because that is the date which we'll use to calculate. And as we'll talk about later, is that zakat has specific times, and zakat, can change based on when you receive your wealth. So knowing that date is extremely important to ensure that you're not giving less zakat than you actually have to. So nowadays, you can access bank statements online, from up to 10 years. So it's not that difficult to go back and figure out what the date was where we became the first, became first owners of Nisab. We can take a step back, kind of look at when, we, got our first job, when we became, when we became baligh, what months, and try our best to figure out a date. And if we really cannot figure out a date, then we should set a date from now. And we say, you know what? I can't figure out the date, but from this year onwards, this is the date that I'm going to use as my zakat. So it's kind of like, a taxable year, right? The earnings you have up to this date is what you consider. So the same thing with zakat as well. So you'll take that into consideration. So let's say, for example, you say, you know what, on the 1st of Sha'ban, every single year is the date that I'm going to look at all my wealth, and that's what I'm going to calculate my zakat on. Okay, so now the first day, then during the year, your wealth can increase or decrease within that year. However, if you totally lose your zakat, you totally lose all your wealth, then your nisab gets reset, and then you will wait for the next day, and then 1 year later, on the same day, you're going to pay 2.5% of your total assets. And then again, this is a note which concerns the 1 year, is that the simplest opinion, I'm going to put it that way, the simplest opinion and the Hanafi opinion is that a person takes into consideration the two ends of the year, and a person doesn't look at what's happening throughout the year. And why that is because it creates a lot of accounting issues if a person takes, the whole year. And I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about that why. But a person will take into consideration whatever wealth he receives throughout the year, and he will only, consider what he has left at the end of the year, and not, the minimum amount which is trailing. uh Next slide, please. Okay, so for example, right, so let's say a person's zakatable date is Ramadan 2022, Ramadan, for 2022, sorry, the 22nd of Ramadan 1445, right? So he has nisab, his wealth, which goes above the nisab on the date. Okay, so we're good with that. Okay, now throughout the year, we see that his zakatable wealth drops. It drops below the nisab, right? So there's a curve, it drops, but then it goes back up, right? And then on the zakat due date, he has nisab again. So now, because he has nisab on both sides of the year, because he has the zakat, amount on the both ends of the year, then he will give his zakat. What that means is that if, for example, on the 20th of Ramadan, if on the 20th of Ramadan he receives a lump sum from work, a large bonus from work of $10,000. So he started off for $1,000, right? He started off for $1,000, and then the 20th of Ramadan, Manzil's portfolio did amazing, and he got a dividend of $10,000. So now he will calculate his his zakat on the full amount on Ramadan 21, on that $10,000, even though he only owned that $10,000 for 1 day. On the flip side, if he had $1,000 the whole year he had $1,000, but on the 20th of Ramadan, he loses $700 and his wealth decreases to 200. Now he had zakat for 359 days, and on the 360th day, when you're supposed to calculate his zakat, his wealth dipped below the nisab. So now zakat is not obligatory upon him, right? So this is the simplest opinion, is to take the two ends of the year, inshallah. But if a person doesn't, what does that mean? Go to the next slide, please. right? If we start taking every dollar in for a full year, it can become an accounting nightmare. So, for example, if a person is getting paid bi-weekly, person gets paid $600 bi-weekly, or he gets paid $800 bi-weekly. Now, the next, so for 2 weeks, he got $800, he kept it in his account. Then the next 2 weeks, he gets paid another $800. So now he has $1,600 in his account. Now he's going to spend $100 on groceries. The question is, does that $100, is it deducted from the first 800? Is it deducted from the second 800? Or is it deducted from the 1600? Because if you're looking at that every dollar has to be in for a full year, when you come back the next year, a lot of spending took place and a lot of things came in. So now the question is, which dollars that we spent were taken from which account? Right? So this is an actual discussion which takes place. So even contemporary scholars who follow that opinion, and what happens is that if a person takes his opinion, a person will essentially be giving zakat throughout the year. Okay, he earned wealth, he earned a salary this year now, and next year he still has that, he has money in his account, so he's gonna give zakat again. So the whole year he'll essentially be giving zakat. Every single month he'll be giving zakat, which is very difficult to do. So even contemporary ulama who follow the opinion of taking that wealth, every single piece of wealth, individually for it to be there for a year, even those ulama mention that it's safer and easier to follow the Hanafi opinion because it's easier to calculate. Otherwise, it becomes a very difficult problem to solve on accounting perspective. Okay, next slide, please. So our zakatable assets, so not zakatable assets, so gold and silver, cash, gold and silver jewelry. So this is a matter of difference of opinion as well. So according to the Hanafi opinion, that gold and silver, whatever their usages may be, whether they're there to invest, or whether you're using them, whether you're not using them, they will have to be, they'll be zakatable regardless. You'll subtract the precious stones. So if there's diamonds or any other rubies or whatever, you'll subtract those, but you'll have to give zakat nonetheless on the weight of the gold. On your business inventory, you'll have to give zakat, and on certain investments based on the investment types. So precious stones, vehicles, properties, electronics, household appliances, these are non-zakatable assets, regardless of how valuable they may be. Next slide, please. So zakat on investments. Okay, so investment property. So there's two types. So whether you've purchased it with the explicit intention to resell or with the intention of gaining rental income. So if you've purchased it with the explicit intention of resell, so you've purchased it because you're going to resell it, then in that scenario, it will be zakat at 100%. So at the market value, sorry, at the retail value, not the market value. So whatever it goes for, that's the value that you will consider in paying zakat because you purchased it to resell. However, if you purchased it to as a rental, or right, sometimes may have dual opinions. Okay, I'm going to rent it out for a bit and then I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to live in it for a bit and then I'm going to sell it. So regardless, if you have a dual intention, or you only have one intention of rental income, in that scenario you will not give zakat on the value of the property. So even if you have an intention to sell in the future, but right now you don't have an intention to sell, you haven't purchased it to sell immediately, you will not calculate that amongst your zakatable assets. If it's a source of rental income for you, then you will give zakat on the unexpended uh, income from the rent, right? So just like a salary, whatever is left at the end of the year, you're going to give zakat on that amount. You don't have to give zakat on the entire rental income. So let's say, you get a rental income of 100,000 a year, but that rental income is subject to expenses. So at the end of the year, you only have 40,000 remaining. So you're not going to give zakat on 100,000. You're only going to give zakat on 40,000 because that's the unexpended income of your rental property. Cryptocurrencies, depending on the opinion or the understanding of what that crypto may be. Um, Generally, cryptocurrencies which serve as currencies, such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, these are kind of used as methods of payment nowadays. Those are zakatable at 100%. And that's actually the safest opinion. So those contemporary scholars which have a blanket understanding that all cryptocurrencies are more or less similar to fiat currency and gold and silver, they opine that you should give zakat 100%. That's the safest opinion, inshallah. However, if a person wants to follow the opinion as well, is that you could look at the underlying, token, and what it serves and what it represents, and then give zakat accordingly, based on the zakatable assets that it represents. NFTs, if it's purchased for a for an investment, for a short-term investment, to buy and sell, then a person will give zakat on 100%. And if a person doesn't purchase for that, but just to hold, to hold, to bring value, then in that scenario, then it's not zakatable 100%. It will be only be zakatable on the dividends, or you could say the gains that a person earns. Mutual funds, RSPs and shares and all that. So we have a separate slide for that. So these are all zakatable, based on the zakatable assets that it holds. So we'll talk uh, more specific about that when the time comes, inshallah. Next slide, please. Okay, so zakat on investments. So zakat is due on the entire holding at in current market value if a person intends to resell. So if you're a trader and you buy and sell stocks to make an income, then you will have to give zakat on the entire holding, at the current market value. However, if you've you purchased it for long-term investments or to earn dividends, and this is also applicable to RESPs and RSPs because they're generally invested into different stocks. And they're invested not on a short-term basis but on a long-term basis to gain dividends, to earn dividends. Then you'll have to only give zakat on the zakatable assets of the company. Okay, so to understand this, let's look at it this way. If you have a bakery, you own a bakery, and in your bakery, you have a you have cash that you've held, for for whatever reason. And then you may have, for example, cookbooks that you're intending to sell. You may have utensils that you sell, and then you may have, products that you sell. And then you may have machinery that you use for your bakery, ovens, etc. So when you're calculating zakat for your bakery, you're going to exclude certain things. So you're going to exclude your machinery. You're going to, because there are fixed assets, so zakat is not applicable on fixed assets. You're going to exclude those things. You're going to exclude, your debts that you may have incurred on behalf of your business. But you'll include products, right? So you include, for example, your cookbooks. You include your utensils which you're selling, and you're going to include the cash which is in your possession, for your business. So the same way, when you're purchasing a share, you become a shareholder of the company. So you're going to calculate the zakatable assets of the company. So what you're going to do is you're going to look into the financials of that corporation, look at their liquid assets, illiquid assets, and then their fixed assets, and then their liabilities, their receivables, and all of that. And then you're going to come with a fancy number. Okay, so this is the zakatable assets of the corporation multiplied by the amount of shares that you have, and then you have a an amount, and then you are going to pay 2.5% on that amount, right? Of course, that's very complicated, right? To go and do that, it's always better to do it because you'll be sure and certain that you're paying the right amount. But a proxy that we can utilize, which is something which was, alhamdulillah, founded, or a conclusion which Mufti Faraz, who is one of the Sharia advisors of Manzil, has come to through the National Zakat Foundation. So his study concluded, and so he made a long study in which he took uh, many stocks from the S&P 500, the halal ones, and looked at the zakatable assets, and he found that generally the zakatable assets of a corporation do not exceed 25%. So instead of doing that whole workaround, a person can take the 25% proxy, inshallah, and pay zakat on that. So, for example, if a person owns $1,000 worth of stocks in a corporation, so he can multiply 1,000 by 25%, so it comes back to $250, and then he's going to give 2.5% of $250. That makes it easier, inshallah, for a person to calculate their zakat, inshallah. And if for simple for simple calculation purposes, person can take 0.625%, and that'll, inshallah, bring him to the that calculation simply, inshallah. So that's a simple way of calculating zakat on your investments, and similar to your RSPs as well. Next slide, please. Some miscellaneous rulings. So commodity for trade. So commodities with the purchase intention, with the intention of resale. So if you you own a business, you don't own a business, but you commonly like to buy and sell phones. So you buy the phones with the intention to resell them. So you'll give zakat on the market value of those retail value, sorry, uh, of those phones. Fixed assets are non-zakatable, so machinery, buildings, furnitures. So that includes, you know, as you mentioned, rental income, or in a business if you have machinery, etc. And zakat will be calculated on according to the retail price. Personal gold, silver is zakatable, and all accessible money held by a third party is zakatable. So that's why RRSPs, even though there is a penalty which is applicable, however, it is accessible. So you will have to give zakat. And an example of unaccessible wealth is, for example, the CPP. So we are contributing to the Canadian Pension Plan. However, we have zero access to it. We don't know anything about it. So I mean, we do, but we don't have no access to it. There's no way for us to get it until we reach that age. So there's no zakat on that until we actually receive that zakatable wealth, inshallah. And then there's a difference between contributing to it voluntarily and involuntarily contributing it to a CPP, for example. We are not voluntarily contributing to it. It's automatically been deducted from our paychecks every single month. So it's as though we never received it. It's as though we never came into our possession. Versus a locked-in investment account, in which it's locked in, but however, we are contributing to it voluntarily. We are giving to it every single month. So it is technically accessible. However, we've chosen voluntarily to give it to a third party. And we'll talk about how receivables are calculated, inshallah, in a bit, and that's applicable to these type of investments as well. Next slide, please. Receivable. So money that you give out as a loan, or money that you have accessible in the hands of somebody else, which you are not accessing at the moment right now. So you have to give zakat, and zakat can be done in two ways. So going back to the example which I mentioned before about salah, right? So you have an obligation, a general obligation of salah, and then you have the obligation of discharging your salah, and that's applicable only right towards the end of the salah time. So zakat as well has that as well, where zakat is obligatory, but then there is a specific time where zakat is obligatory, or it's obligatory to discharge that zakat. So when it comes to a debt, it's obligatory for a person to calculate that amount in his wealth and his zakatable wealth. However, to discharge that zakat is not obligatory until he actually receives that amount. So a person has two choices. The first choice, which is the simpler one, is that a person includes it amongst his total assets, and then he pays zakat on it yearly. Person gave $10,000 worth of zakat, worth of a debt to a person, so he calculates that amongst his wealth and he gives zakat on it yearly, and like that, he's absolved of his obligation. That's number one. That's option number one. Option number two is that he leaves it. He doesn't give zakat. However, when he does receive that zakat, then he is going to calculate for all of the previous years. What that means, for example, person gave $10,000 over 10 years, and on the 10th year, he finally receives his $10,000 back. So now he's going to give zakat for every single year. So he's going to do $10,000 times 2.5%. He comes to a certain amount. Okay, then the next 10,000. Then he's going to subtract that, calculate 2.5%, 10 times until his zakat is paid off. So he has two options. You can do option one or option two. This is also applicable to investment accounts. It's also applicable to RRSPs, that a person can uh, calculate the zakat right now, or he can pay his zakat later on at a later date. Uh, he can when he withdraws it. Okay. Next one, please. Short-term liabilities and debt. So what can a person subtract from his wealth? So from his zakatable wealth. So there is a difference between a long-term liability and a short-term liability. Long-term liability is what is due past a year, and short-term is within a year. So if a debt, it has to be paid within a year. So, for example, a government loan, a student loan, which is paid over 2 years, 3 years. I saw one question in the chat. So, if a person has a student loan which is going to pay over 2 years. Now, he chooses, to pay a certain amount within 1 year. So that is the amount that is owing, and that is the amount which he can subtract from his zakatable assets. So not the full amount. This is also applicable, right? And this is again with the understanding that taking a mortgage is impermissible because of the presence of riba. But should a person have taken a riba-based mortgage, or should he have taken a car financing, then how much can he deduct from his zakatable assets? So he can deduct up to 1 year. He is not going to deduct more than that. He's going to deduct only up to 1 year, and he's only going to deduct the principal payments, not going to deduct the interest portion of his payments. So if, for example, his payments for the whole year is $5,000, and from that $5,000, 4,000 goes towards interest and 1,000 goes towards his principal, he can deduct $1,000. This is also applicable to um, into car financing as well, not leasing and not rental. So you can't deduct your rental amount, you can't deduct your lease amount, you only deduct your finance amount. So unpaid zakat, unpaid bills, unpaid personal loans, and these are liabilities which are already outstanding. So if, for example, right, in a few years from now, Ramadan is going to be in February and January. Now, our tax date might be in March or in April. So we may ask ourselves that, that we anticipate our, taxes to be a certain amount. So, and we might have to owe some amount of taxes. So can we take that amount, consider that amount to deduct our zakat? Or that's one question. The answer is the same for the other scenarios I'm going to mention. Or for example, we may be renovating our basement, and we have a few thousands locked in so that we can use it towards our renovations. And our zakatable date is in Ramadan, but this expense will be incurred in a few months from now. So can we subtract that amount from our zakatable wealth? Another question is that, we've put a deposit to purchase a house. So do we calculate zakat on that? So all of these scenarios, because all of these liabilities have not fallen yet, they're not applicable yet. So in these scenarios, sorry, we are not going to subtract that amount. Rather, we're going to uh, you know included within our zakatable wealth. Um, in this discussion as well is the RRSP and penalty. So there's a lot of discussion regarding that. So whether or not when a person calculates his zakat on their RRSPs and investment accounts, should they subtract their withholding tax? So according to some scholars, you do, based on this. Based on the fact that it's a liability and it doesn't really belong to you. But my understanding and the understanding of many ulama as well is that that liability has to have occurred for it to be applicable or to be legible to be a deductor of zakat. Based on that, zakat is on the wealth that you own, and the wealth that you own is that total amount, which includes the withholding tax as well. So according to my understanding, and according to many other ulama as well, that you will not subtract, you will not deduct the withholding tax from the RSP amount that you hold. However, you will give zakat on the zakatable assets of the RSP without subtracting the withholding tax. Next slide, please. Long-term debts where repayment is not required immediately, you can subtract only the forthcoming unit. So we've already done this. The balance of interest in mortgage, student loans cannot be treated as a debt for zakat calculation. And then, sorry. So then you do the math. You count all the Okay. You count all the liquid and liquid assets. You add the equivalent value of all the silver, gold, and silver. Add the loans that you're giving out, if applicable. Subtract the current debts. Calculate 2.5% of your total zakatable assets, and then give out your zakat. Next slide. So one should not delay in giving zakat. So after a year has passed, a person will be sinful. So sometimes, right? And just recently, I had this question. Somebody said they calculated zakat on their gold, and it's a very high amount, and they don't have that amount right now. So do they have to give that amount right now? So the answer is no. You have one whole year, so you can give it within installments. But after a year has passed, then you'll be sinful, and you have to make intention to give, when you give zakat, an intention has to be made at the time of giving zakat, or to the representative that's going to give that zakat to a eligible person. The intention has to be made whilst giving that zakat. That's very important. And the recipient has to acquire full possession and become the full owner of the zakat amount unconditionally. So what that means is a person can't, rent a banquet hall, and then, spend thousands of dollars and, just feed people and say, my zakat is discharged this way. A person has to actually make the person the owner of that zakat. And then um, it has to be unconditional, which means that there can't be any strings attached. So I'm going to give you this zakat on condition that you are going to work for me, or I'm going to give you this zakat as a salary. So zakat has to be unconditionally given to an individual for it to be considered fulfilled. Next slide. The recipients of zakat. So this is the ayat of the Quran which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned. So these are the recipients of zakat. Inshallah, we won't go through the full tafsir of it, but this is the ayat of the Quran. Next slide, please. So who can you give zakat to? So the Quran mentions many, seven types of people. My understanding is that, you know, to be safe, limit your zakat to these three types of people. Why is because every other type of person that can receive zakat is a stretch in my understanding, right? So to give zakat, for example, fi sabilillah had a classical understanding, a specific individual, and then now, you know, it's being understood, you know, to pay towards things which into organizations, that are doing good work, alhamdulillah. But it's not so clear how that ayah is being applied. Same thing with amilin alayha, which is the people who are working for zakat. um, that has a specific understanding as well, and it's being utilized today by organizations to collect zakat. In my understanding, to be the most safe, stick to these three categories, because these are the three simple categories which you'll find in abundance. Right? You'll find in abundance in North America and outside, and inshallah, these are the types and categories which have no difference of opinion, right? There's no difference of opinion that you can give zakat to these. But to give zakat to an organization which is doing good work, legal work, or giving zakat to an organization that's building wells, or giving your zakat to an organization that's doing other things on the basis of amilina aliha, or on the basis of fi sabilillah, uh, these, or on the basis of mu'allafati qulubuhum, these are all in my understanding, stretches and very very questionable. So give your zakat to these three categories, inshallah. Number one, the poor and the needy. Sorry, just go back. Poor and the needy. The difference is fuqara and masakin. Masakin are those who don't have anything at all. Fuqara who have a bit of money but not enough to pay their zakat. So give your zakat to them. Debtors, so people that are in debt. So people whose liabilities are more than their zakatable assets. And actually, according to some ulama, the people that are in debt are the most preferred recipient of zakat. Right? The people that are in debt are the most preferred recipients of zakat, because they have an obligation, and there's stern warnings for people who die with debts. So giving zakat to people that are in debt is very very recommended, especially nowadays. Students who are in debt, give them your zakat so that they can help pay their debt and come out of debt quicker, inshallah. And the rest of the recipients, as I mentioned, are hardly present, and if they are present, then it's a stretch. So try to focus yourself on these three, inshallah. The next slide, please. So who should you give your zakat to? So it's like a circle, as I like to say. So give your zakat to those that are closest to your circle. So those are your close relatives. So you can give zakat. You cannot give zakat to your ascendants and your descendants, and neither your spouse. So give zakat to your close relatives, such as your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, those people who Sharia has actually obligated you to spend on. So give zakat on to them, because they are most deserving, inshallah. And then if they, if they already are all doing well, then give zakat to people that are residing locally, right? So, and this is actually according to one opinion of the Shafi madhab, that is it's actually impermissible to give zakat outside of your locality if there are people in your locality that deserve zakat. And actually, there are many people, right? With all the inflation, with all the different, costs going up, there are so many people now that are actual eligible recipients of zakat. So try to prioritize local people. Give zakat to local people, inshallah. And then after that, give zakat to people that are in crisis, that are in desperate emergency need. And ensure your zakat is given to a responsible and reputable organization. The best thing is you've done your vetting process. You know this person can receive zakat. You give them zakat. Alhamdulillah. However, if you're giving it to an organization, then ensure that they have a policy in place in which the zakat passes to deserving recipients, inshallah. Next slide. So who are people that you cannot give zakat to? You cannot give zakat to a masjid and madrasa. Masjid and madrasas are doing amazing work. Alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sustain them. But if a masjid comes to you, or a masjid comes to you, or institute comes to you that says, you know what, we're doing great work for the youth, give us zakat to pay off our building, please don't give them zakat. Zakat is given to individuals, zakat is not given to institutions. However, if a masjid or a madrasa, so for example, we run an institute, and I have an institute in which zakat is given to students who are in need, right? So that's different. You can give zakat to an institution which gives zakat to students. Give zakat to eligible recipient of zakat. And a masjid, you may have a zakat box in which the masjid management gives zakat to eligible recipients. That's fine. But to give zakat for a masjid project or madrasa project is impermissible. You should not give your zakat to those projects. Construction projects, same thing. You should not be giving zakat towards construction projects. However good the mission may be, zakat is given to, again, to individuals. Wages, remunerations, welfare projects, ascendant, descendant, spouse, non-Muslims, you don't give zakat to these individuals. Neither do you give zakat to the inheritors or the family of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Sayyids. Next slide, please. In summary, you calculate the amount you must pay in zakat, you make the intention of giving zakat. So either when you give zakat or when you separate the money to give zakat. So sometimes, for example, you may be giving zakat throughout the year, but just to be safe, you want to allocate that money from the beginning. So you want to just put that cash aside and then you'll spend it as time goes on. So when you do separate it from the rest of your wealth, you make intention at that time. Then you ensure the recipient is eligible to receive zakat, and then you make the intention to give complete unconditional ownership to that person while giving your zakat, inshallah, and then your zakat will be complete. I believe that's so. Final calculation, zakatable assets minus deduction of liabilities, which brings your net zakatable assets, which you multiply 2.5%, and then you get your zakat, inshallah.
So I can jump into this
Yes.
one, and then you could sort of support me through it, inshallah. There were some questions, and there's always some questions around Menzel specific points. So in your Menzel invest portfolios, you are invested in different assets. You've got the Sharia compliant public equities, you've got the Menzel mortgage fund, physical precious metals, a Sukuk, which is also an ETF, and then the Sharia compliant real estate investment trusts. So those are REITs. And so how each of them are sort of treated. The ETFs are treated as long-term or short-term investments. So you would apply whatever it is that you learn from this workshop to that as if they were, long-term or short-term investments. The Menzel Mortgage Fund is treated as though that unit holders who meet the conditions for the obligation of zakah will be liable to pay zakah on the face value of their units. There is that you don't multiply it for the zakatable income part. You pay it on the entire value of the unit, and then the precious metals asset class you would consider it as holding gold or silver. The sukuks and the REITs are both treated as long-term or short-term investments, and then you would treat it as such. And then lastly, if you have a mortgage with Manzil, you can deduct I know Mufti Saab, he talked about not deducting the interest portion, but a Manzil mortgage does not include interest. So therefore, you would deduct the entire mortgage payment. Anything to add there?
No, inshallah.
Okay, awesome. Live Q&A. So I do have some questions here that I think I've tried marking off the ones that you answered throughout the conversation. But to everyone that's here still, there are a bunch of questions here. I know we've passed the 1 o'clock time, but if you want to stay for the Q&A, add more questions, listen to his responses, inshallah, you can. If not, jazakallah khair for joining us. Uh, but yeah, we'll continue with the Q&A. So someone had a specific questions around venture capital shares that are invested in non-listed startups, which cannot be liquidated or sold to bring cash despite having high on-paper market value.
Uh,
How do you calculate zakat on that?
okay. I don't have the answer to that right now. So if you can just email that question to us, inshallah, and then we'll answer it in due course, inshallah.
Yeah, Mahmoud, please reach out. Please reach out to Manzil, salam@manzil.ca, or through our support page, and please mention that zakat workshop question, and we'll get back to you, inshallah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So that is one point as well, is that there are some points. Of course, I don't want to give a wrong answer because zakat is an act of ibadah. So inshallah, if there is a question which I cannot answer or I feel like I should look into more, I'll mention it. Then just please email it to us and we'll get back to you, inshallah, within due course. Is
yeah,
there an opinion that states that this gold and silver will be calculated separately and that the silver cash will no, there is no opinion. It's either you take gold or the silver. So you have to choose one standard. You don't choose both. Um, okay. Although my intention is to hold my Manzil or RSP long term, Manzil would still sell some ETFs when they are not performing well. Should I then pay zakat on the whole portfolio or no? Although my intention is to hold, I have to control on how right. So Manzil portfolios, I think you mentioned are long hold. So you give zakat on the zakatable. You look at the portfolio. You look at your portfolio on the zakat date, and then you give zakat on the zakatable assets, inshallah. Yeah, I think you should leave that over there so we can refer that to, inshallah. Okay, what about zakat on ETF? Do we still follow the 25% zakatable asset rules? Yes, you do. Basically, you do follow the 25% rule. If a person lent somebody a personal loan, but that person does not currently have the ability to pay the money back, it's still considered strong debt as long as he doesn't deny the debt, right? So if a person you have no and you have no proof to prove that debt. So um, if you have proof that a person has that debt and you are still expecting to be paid back, um, then in that scenario you still calculate that zakat in your debt. But if you forgive it, then you don't calculate anymore. Or if the person denies the debt and you have no way of proving it and you have no hope at all whatsoever that that debt will ever be established and paid, then you can consider it a bad debt and remove it from your zakat calculations. About RSP, okay, we can't access RSP until kids go to college and university. We have to pay zakat. So RSPs is a bit nuanced. So with the RSP, you will give zakat on your portion that you're contributing until the child becomes baligh, and then you won't give zakat on the government contribution because it's subject to the child going to university. So once you hand it over, then it's the child's responsibility, and he'll take it from there and calculate zakat on it from there. But until it's in your possession, you're contributing to it, then you'll have to give zakat on your portion, inshallah.
what about the
RSPs,
growth?
sorry,
What about the growth?
yes, on the growth as well.
Okay, so if there's $1,000 from me and $200 from the government, and there's a growth of 10%, I'm paying zakat on $1,100 and leaving out the $220.
Correct. I mean, whatever portion is, like, I mean, it's kind of like at that point, um, you're it's like a 80% or like or whatever percentage that may be,
Yeah.
would belong to you, and then the rest
Okay.
would belong to the government. So based on that proportion, you give zakat on it, inshallah. That's one option. Or the other option is that you just wait until you withdraw, and then once you withdraw it, then when it's withdrawn, then you give zakat on the previous years. That's also when the government has made their portion available to you. RSPs, you calculate zakat on, as I mentioned, that you'll calculate based on the holdings of the RSP. So if the RSP, for example, is just savings, so it's not invested into anything, then it's zakatable on the full amount. But if it's invested in stocks, then you'll take the zakatable portion of that equity of that holding and give zakat on that on 25%. Invest in some properties to an organization. There are some investors like me who will know the gain loss only after the property is sold in the market. I'm not sure when these properties will be selling. If the amount I've invested through this organization will be zakatable or not. Um, so I mean, I don't know the details of this, but if, for example, you have purchased a property, or the company is purchasing properties to sell them right away, then on the zakatable date, you will have to look at the portion or the size of the portfolio, and then give according to how much you own of that portfolio, and then on the retail value, and then you'll give zakat on that. So on that zakatable date. So you're not going to look at the whole year, what's happening throughout the year, but the zakatable date, and give based on the value of the portfolio on that date. That's if the corporation is in the business of buying and selling properties. However, if they're a company which doesn't buy and sell properties, but they rent them out, then in that scenario, you will have to give zakat only on the income, which is unexpended at the end of the year. The dividends, you won't have to give zakat on the value of your portfolio, because that's not those are not zakatable assets. What if zakat is technically due in 1 year, but a person intends to pay it off in 1 year? So basically, what we consider is the liability. So how much are you liable to pay, in 1 year? So even if you intend to pay it in 1 year, more than 1 year, you can't deduct what you intend to pay. You can only deduct what you're liable to pay, right? So that's kind of the concept. But of course, if you're spending that amount before your zakat is due, then you're going to deduct that amount from your zakat, because you don't have ownership of that wealth anymore. But in terms of calculating, you will only calculate what's due in that year, and not what you intend to pay during that year. For contractors to pay taxes and other amounts for governments, but have to wait until the end of the year to know exactly how much is owed, do we have to calculate zakat on the full amount which is in the bank at the time of zakat? Yes, you have to give zakat on what's in the bank. When the taxes are due, that's when you can deduct it. And if your zakat is calculated before that date, then you still have to calculate the full amount, even though your taxes are due later on. Can zakat be paid in the form of food? Yes, you can. Ownership is necessary. So as long as you give them an ownership of something that belongs to them, and they could do what they want with it, that's sufficient, inshallah, for your zakat. Okay, so I think I discussed about the withholding tax and RSP. So we talked about that. When paying off someone's debt and loan, is required to ask the person to promise that he won't take another loan to demotivate habitual debt. You can advise him, but his promise is not binding. But you can advise him. To follow my question about giving zakat to family or debtors, what if we don't know if the debt is more than the asset? You have to know. You have to ask them. You have to make sure that that's the case, because it's your zakat. You can't just assume that that's the case. So find out from different ways. You can ask them, personally, like, I want to help you with your debt. Do you have enough to pay your debt? Or is your debt less than that? How much is due with 1 year? And you can judge based on that and give to your family members. When calculating previous year's zakat, I heard you can deduct the full value of a long-term loan which ended up being paid off that year. But can a person choose not to deduct the full-term loan? I've never heard this before. Sorry. Um, from what I know is that a long-term loan is not deductible, except for the short-term portion of it, which is due in 1 year. The pension question asked above is more for employer pension, where they match your contributions, not CPP. Is just my contribution eligible for zakat, or both mine? So if the employer's portion is vested, then it's your portion and the employer's portion. But if it's not vested, and it's not been, given over to you, then in that scenario, you don't calculate your employer's portion. If you have RSP 100K at the end of the year, do we pay zakat on the whole amount? I think we've talked about RSP, so I'm going to skip that question. I've already paid zakat this year to organizational categories of fi sabilillah and to some local projects. What do I do in this case? Um, Subhanallah. I mean, inshallah, try your best not to give zakat. And if it's not a significant amount that you can still give, I would say, to be on the safe side, give it to another individual. But if it's a significant amount that would cause a lot of haraj, then inshallah, right, you can just intend that you're following a certain opinion, and inshallah you'll be safe with that. But if it's possible, then try to give it to another individual so that you can be on the safe side. Deductible amount it's on the screen, so you can look at it. I remember Mufti Saab said that according to some opinions, you just take 25% on long-term investment values. But what is the time frame of long-term? So long-term investment value is an investment which you hold without the intention of reselling it right away, right? So this is something which is important. That dual intentions can occur, but what is considered short term is an explicit intention at the time of purchase to resell. That is the scenario in which you take the full value. But if you hold it for a bit, but then you're going to eventually sell it, that falls under the category of long term. So then in that scenario, you will calculate only the zakatable assets at 25%. You will not calculate the full value. So again, if the only scenario where you will calculate the full value is if you've purchased it right now with the intention of reselling it in the immediate future. But if you want to hold it for a bit and then benefit from the benefit from the dividends and then sell it at a later date, then it falls into long term and you calculate 25%. Est-ce qu'on aura le replay? Oui, ça c'est, je pense, c'est enregistré et ça sera partagé, inshallah. Again, I don't have access to the pension until I retire, so interested how the timing would work. We've talked about that. Okay. If I purchase not to resell, but now my intention has changed and I plan to sell after 5 years, no, you don't have to do it. You only do it at the time of actual sale, not right now. Uh, I have seen two opinions on long-term debt, Manzil mortgage. One says we just deduct a month mortgage, and other says the entire year's premium. So I have a question actually, which I was going to ask Abdul Mateen later on, but I can ask right now is that this the opinion on the Manzil mortgage deducting 1 year mortgage was that a fatwa the Mufti Faraz gave, or where did that opinion come from?
On the mortgage,
Yeah,
the point of that, if you have a mortgage with Menzel, the point of that was that the payment does not include any interest. So
but I mean
whatever opinion you take,
the deduction, the fact that it's deductible, was that a fatwa that was given by Mufti Faraz or any other?
the fact that it's deductible, the 1 year mortgage.
Yeah,
Um, let me just pull it up. Let me just pull up the fatwa, and I'll share it on the screen, inshallah. But I believe it was from Mufti Faraz. But his fatwa might have been more specific to the MMF investments
right.
itself.
Because in a Manzil mortgage, from my understanding, inshallah we can issue a clarification if it need be. But my understanding with the Manzil mortgage is because it's a musharaka, it's not a debt. And because of that, we can only deduct the month which is due. So if let's say that the sale has already taken place for the quarter, and the sales has already taken place, that's considered a debt, and that's what you can deduct, and not the entire year. So I'm not certain about point number 6 that you've mentioned. So I think we should issue a clarification with that. But my understanding is that a Islamic finance product, which is based on musharaka, is not considered a debt per se. So it should not be deductible. But I think we should clarify that point, inshallah.
Here's the fatwa.
Yeah. So this is a Manzil mortgage fund. Doesn't discuss about deducting the mortgage payments.
Okay, we'll clarify that, inshallah. Um, Back to the Q&A.
Okay, I've seen two opinions, a long-term opinion, right? So my understanding, again, as I mentioned, is that it should only be the month, not the full year. So that's the same for Mahmoud Hassan. If you lend money, the person is not giving it back, just says you will give it back. So you still have to give zakat on it, as long as you are, still hold that debt, if you forgive it, then you don't have to give it. But if you still have that debt, then you don't give zakat on it. Si je prends de l'argent à une personne et je ne sais pas quand est-ce que la personne va me rembourser, est-ce que je dois quand même calculer le zakat sur cet argent? Oui, on va quand même calculer le zakat sur cette portion-là. Euh, alors, comme on a mentionné dans la présentation, il y a deux options. Option numéro un, c'est que vous calculez à chaque année et vous payez le zakat. Et l'option numéro deux, c'est que vous attendez jusqu'à temps qu'il vous réimburse le montant. Et quand il vous réimburse le montant, quand il vous a réimbursé le montant, vous allez calculer le zakat pour les années précédentes. C'est-à-dire que si vous avez emprunté, emprunté 10 000 dollars à quelqu'un et il vous le redonne après 5 années. Alors, option numéro un, c'est que vous calculez ce 10 000 là dans vos assets dans vos actifs à chaque année. Ça, c'est option numéro un. Option numéro 2, c'est que vous attendez après les 5 années et quand vous allez recevoir les 10 000, vous allez le calculer à chaque année. Alors, 10 000 fois 2,5% jusqu'à temps que vous avez fait ça 5 fois, Inch'Allah. Is 2.25% figure of Zakatable? I asked because I heard from Mufti Abdurrahman, you can figure 40%. Again, 25% is it's based on ijtihad. It's based on work that's been done. You can take 25% to be more safe. You can take 40%, or to be more safe, you can do your calculations. So either of the two of the three are possible. Are the following considered short-term or long-term debt? Credit card debt, it's considered a long-term. It's considered short-term debt because it's the whole balance is due at any given moment. Credit line debt, the same thing. These are all considered short-term debt. So credit card debts and um, credit lines, those are deductible at full at any given point. If you had investment like a mutual fund with a big bank, how do we go about paying zakat? Okay, so in a mutual fund with the bank, the most of their assets are cash. So to be safe, you should give zakat 100% on it because most of it is, I mean, by subtracting as well the liabilities, but it will be more than 25%. So you have to look into the financials to figure out the zakatable assets for that mutual fund. Should we deduct the Manzil as a liability of the next year? As I mentioned, according to my understanding, was that it's deductible only for that current month because it's a musharaka. However, inshallah, we will issue a clarification should need be, but that's my understanding for that, inshallah.
I
Uh,
I I looked up where that response was from.
yeah,
And it was it it is a difference of it's like another opinion. But based on whatever it is that you follow, if you follow the opinion of subtracting 12 months, um, and that response was to someone that did follow that opinion, and they were just asking if they should subtract the profit portion of the payment. Does that make sense?
okay. Oh, okay, all right, I see.
So that's more so what it was around. If you subtract the entire payment, or do you treat the profit portion as quote unquote interest and subtract that portion of it?
Okay, all right, I see. All right, so yeah, so according to my understanding, the Manzil mortgage, right, is not deductible except for that portion which is due in that month, because that's the actual debt, like any type of payment that you have to pay. So like a phone bill, right? That month is deductible because it's due that month. But there is other opinions as well, but my opinion is that. So inshallah we can, we have
And that is there was a few questions. That is the majority Hanafi opinion, correct?
um I can't speak about the other madahib. That is 100% the Hanafi opinion, but it could also be another opinion as well. I don't know, but I will say that you can't consider on a Sharia perspective, you cannot consider 1 year's worth of payments as a debt because it's not a debt. A musharaka is not a debt. We're saving ourselves from debts through a musharaka. So uh, maybe it's a contemporary understanding, but on a classical perspective, the 1 year's worth of payments on a manzil mortgage is not considered a debt. So I'd find it difficult for any classical scholar to consider to be a debt for 1 year. But however, again, that may be a contemporary understanding. So I'll keep it at that. I don't know the full details of that opinion, but my understanding is that it's not deductible.
Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair,
And
inshallah. I do have to head out, inshallah. So if any other questions are there, inshallah, the emails are here. And you can send it to Manzil, and inshallah, we will get to it in due course, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.